The slap came before I'd even set my keys down on the counter. My own daughter, the girl I taught to bait a hook and read a tide chart, swung her hand across my face hard enough that I tasted copper, and her husband just stood there with his arms folded like a man inspecting a used truck. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't raise my hand. I just looked at the two of them in the kitchen of the house I built with my own hands, and I decided, right then, that the next meal I cooked in that room was going to be the most important one of my life. If you've ever been treated like a worn-out tool by the very people you bled for, stay with me, because this is for you. Hit that like button to keep an old man company, subscribe so you don't lose the thread, and do me a favor, tell me in the comments what town you're listening from tonight. I want to know who's out there. My name is Russell Hartley. Most people up here just call me Russ, or Hartley, or, back when the yard was busy, the old man at the boatworks. I'm 68 years old. For 41 of those years, I owned and ran Hartley Boatworks on the western shore of Penobscot Bay, in a little town called Mooring Point, Maine. We hauled out lobster boats and restored old wooden hulls and built a few new ones from white oak and cedar. And the smell of pine tar and bottom paint is so deep in my skin that I expect it'll still be there when they bury me. I bought that waterfront in 1981 for next to nothing because nobody wanted a muddy cove full of rotting pilings back then. Now the same 3 acres of deep water frontage is worth more money than I can comfortably say out loud. And that, I would learn, was the whole problem. The night my daughter hid me, I had just driven back from Rockland in a sleet storm. February in Maine doesn't forgive anybody. My knees were screaming from the cold the way they always do. 50 years of kneeling on cold concrete and crawling under boat hulls will leave you a roadmap of pain. And all I wanted was to sit by the wood stove with a glass of the rye my late wife used to pour me. But the lights were all on. And there was a car in the drive I didn't recognize. A black Audi with rental plates. And the moment I came through the mudroom door, I could feel the air was wrong. My daughter was standing at the island with a folder open in front of her. My son-in-law was leaning against the refrigerator like he owned it, and there were papers. There are always papers with people like that. "Dad," she said, and her voice had that brittle, rehearsed quality, the way she used to sound when she'd already broken something and was trying to get ahead of it. "We need to talk about the property. You can't keep going like this. It isn't safe. I want to tell you about my daughter for a second, because you need to understand that I didn't raise a monster. I raised a kind, funny, stubborn little girl who used to ride in the bow of my skiff with her hair flying and scream that she was the captain. Her mother and I. Her mother's name was Joan. We gave her everything we had. We weren't rich. We were boat-yard people. But she never went without, and when she wanted to go to college, we cashed out things we shouldn't have cashed out, and we did it gladly. I would do it again. That's the part that still tears at me. I would do it all again. But somewhere in the last decade, she'd married a man named Garrett Pruitt. And Garrett, I came to understand, did to my daughter what salt water does to an unprotected steel fitting. He didn't change her all at once. He worked on her slow, season after season, until the woman standing in my kitchen with a folder was somebody I didn't fully recognize. "What papers?" I said. I didn't sit down. I kept my coat on. Garrett pushed off the refrigerator and slid the folder toward me, smooth as a card sharp. "It's a durable power of attorney," he said, "and a transfer of the LLC that holds the property into a management trust. It's just paperwork, Russ. Estate planning. Everybody our age should have this in place. I'm 68. He's 44. There is no our age between us." I let that hang there for a second. "And what happens," I said slowly, "after I sign this management trust?" "Then we manage it," Garrett said. And he smiled the way a man smiles when he thinks he's already won. "We've got an offer. A real one. Tidewater Resorts wants the Cove for a marina hotel. $3.2 million, Russ. You're sitting on $3.2 million and rotting wooden boats. You could be in a nice place down in Florida. Somewhere warm. Somewhere they take care of you. Somewhere they take care of you." I've thought about that phrase 1,000 times since. It's the kind of thing that sounds like kindness if you don't listen close, and sounds like a prison sentence if you do. I looked at my daughter. Is that what this is? You want to put me somewhere? And here's where she said the thing that I think finally broke whatever was still whole inside me. She said, "Dad, you're not all there anymore. You forget things. You left the burner on last month. Garrett's right. We have to make these decisions for you now before you do something that hurts somebody." I had not left the burner on. I have never left a burner on in my life, but I understood, standing there in my wet coat, exactly what was happening. They were building a story. A story where I was a confused old man, a danger to himself, a liability that needed to be managed and signed away and tucked into a facility while the cove got bulldozed and sold. And my daughter, my captain in the bow of the skiff, was reading from his script. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "Not tonight, not ever. Now I'd like you both to leave my house." That's when she slapped me. I think she surprised herself. For just a flicker, her eyes went wide like part of her had come back. But then Garrett put his hand on her shoulder and squeezed, and the wide-eyed girl went away again, and she lifted her chin and said, "You see? You're making me act like this. You're impossible." I touched my cheek. It was hot. My ears were ringing a little. I'm the big man even now, and there was a younger version of me that would have done something I'd have regretted. But I'd buried that man a long time ago. Somewhere around the third time I had to apologize to Joan for losing my temper. So I just stood there and let the silence get heavy. And then I did the thing that I think rattled them more than any shouting could have. I smiled. "You're right," I said quietly. "I'm an old fool. I've been selfish holding on to all this. Let me sleep on it. Come back Sunday. I'll cook." My voice shook a little. Partly real, partly not. "Bring my grandson. I'd like to have a proper Sunday dinner before we sort the rest of it out. Like a family." Garrett relaxed. I watched it happen across his whole body. The way a man relaxes when he thinks the fish is finally in the net. "Now you're being smart, Russ," he said. "That's the spirit. Sunday. We'll bring the documents." They left. I stood in my kitchen until I heard the Audi crunch out onto the road. And then I sat down at the island, and I put my face in my hands and I let myself feel it for exactly 5 minutes. The slap. The word burden. My daughter's eyes going flat. I let it all wash over me like a wave coming over the gunwale. And then I stood up, poured the rye, and got to work. Because here is something Garrett Pruitt never understood about me. He thought he was dealing with a sentimental old craftsman. He didn't know that I'd spent 40 years learning exactly how rot works. You don't panic when you find rot in a hull. You don't cry about it. You find where it starts, you trace how far it spread, and then you take a saw and you cut every soft inch of it out, all the way back to soundwood, and you don't stop cutting until the blade bites into something solid. I had a rotten plank in my family, and I had until Sunday. The first thing I did was sit at Joan's old writing desk and take out a sheet of paper. My wife and I, we were letter writers. In a marriage of 43 years, we must have written each other 1,000 letters. When I was off on deliveries, when she was visiting her sister, sometimes just left on the kitchen table for no reason at all. After she passed, 4 years ago now, I kept writing them. I'd write to her once a week and put them in a shoebox, crazy maybe. But it kept her close. And on that night, the first letter I wrote wasn't to Joan. It was a list in the form of a letter, addressed to nobody, where I laid out everything I knew and everything I needed to find out. Old habit, I think clearest with a pen in my hand. The next morning, I called Marty Quinn. Marty and I have known each other since we were 8 years old, throwing rocks off the town pier. He went off and became a lawyer in Portland, the kind who wears a tie that costs more than my truck payment. But underneath the tie, he's still the kid who got us both grounded for letting the air out of the principal's tires. I drove the 2 hours down to Portland and I told him everything, And Marty listened without saying a word, and when I was done, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes and said, "Russ, this is bad. This is real bad. But it's also stupid, and stupid people leave tracks." He explained it to me in plain terms. What Garrett was after wasn't just my signature. With the durable power of attorney, Garrett could act as me, sign for me, sell for me, move money for me. And if he could get a doctor or a probate court to declare me incapacitated, he could go further still and get full guardianship, at which point I would legally stop being a person who could make decisions about my own life. My own daughter could be appointed my guardian, and her husband would be standing right behind her holding the pen. "They need two things," Marty said. "They need you to look incompetent, and they need a clean title to sell. The good news is, right now they have neither. The bad news is they're clearly working on the first one. Has anyone taken you to a doctor lately? Suggested an evaluation?" I thought about it. "Lindsay," I said. "That's my daughter. She's been after me to see some specialist in Bangor. A memory thing." I told her I was fine. Marty nodded grimly. "That's the foundation they're laying. They get a friendly diagnosis, they file a petition, and a judge who's never met you decides you're a child. We need to get ahead of it." He pointed his pen at me. "You're gonna go see a doctor, but you're going to see one of mine. A geriatric specialist, board certified, who will do a full cognitive workup and put it in writing that Russell Hartley is sharp as a tack and competent to manage his own affairs. That document is your armor. They cannot build a case around your mind being gone if we have a stack of paper from a real doctor saying it isn't. So that's the first thing I did. I went and let a kind, no-nonsense doctor named Patel quiz me for 2 hours. Draw little clocks, repeat words back, do arithmetic in my head. At the end, she looked at me over her glasses and said, "Mr. Hartley, you have the cognition of a man 20 years younger. Whatever's going on in your family, it isn't your brain." And she wrote it all down, signed and dated, and I drove home with that paper on the seat beside me like it was a loaded shotgun. Armor. I had my armor. But armor doesn't win a fight. Armor just keeps you alive long enough to swing back. The second thing Marty did was give me a name. Vince Tarbox. Vince used to be a state police investigator before he hurt his back and went private, and he had the look of a man who'd seen every rotten thing people do to each other and stopped being surprised by any of it. I met him in a diner in Belfast and laid it out, and Vince ate a whole plate of eggs without saying much, and when he finally spoke, he said, "Here's how it usually goes, Russ. A guy like your son-in-law, he doesn't just want your land. He's already spending money he doesn't have. He's leveraged, and he's been running his mouth to somebody. Give me 2 weeks. Let me look at this Tidewater deal, and let me look at your son-in-law's finances, the parts I can get at. Men like that, they think they're careful. They're never as careful as they think. I spent those 2 weeks doing the hardest thing I have ever done. And I've stood at my wife's grave, so I know what hard is. I spent those 2 weeks pretending to fold. I called my daughter and told her in a small beaten voice that I'd been thinking about it, and maybe they were right. That I was tired. That maybe Florida wasn't so bad. I could hear Garrett in the background, and I could hear the satisfaction in his silence. I played the part of the broken old man so well that I made myself sick. There were nights I'd hang up the phone and sit in the dark and wonder if I even had a daughter anymore, or if Joan and I had just raised a stranger. And in the daylight, I kept the yard going. I had one wooden hull still up on the hearth, a beautiful old friendship sloop a summer family had asked me to restore, and I worked on her every day. There's a peace in that work that I can't explain to a man who's never done it. You scarf in a new section of plank. You ferret down. You watch the grain match up. You're taking something broken and making it whole. And you can't rush a single step of it. The epoxy cures on its own schedule. The varnish needs days between coats. Patience isn't a virtue in that trade. Patience is the entire trade. And I let that work steady my hands and quiet my mind while Vince Tarbox went hunting. He called me on a Thursday. "Russ, you sitting down? Sit down." What Vince found was uglier and bigger than I'd let myself imagine. Garrett Pruitt was not a man with a real estate hobby. Garrett Pruitt was drowning. He'd put money into a development down in Portland that had gone sideways, and to cover it he'd taken out loans against assets he didn't actually own yet, including my cove, which he'd represented to a private lender as already being under his control. He'd formed a shell company in Delaware, the way these fellows always do, and he'd been moving money around to keep 3 different fires from spreading at once. The Tidewater deal wasn't a windfall he wanted to share with me. It was the only thing standing between Garrett Pruitt and total collapse. He needed my land sold fast, and he needed me out of the way to do it, because every day I stayed competent and stubborn was a day closer to his whole house of cards coming down. But the part that put a cold stone in my gut was this. Vince had gotten hold of communications between Garrett and the man at Tidewater Resorts, a developer named Sutton Crane, and in them, Garrett laid the whole plan out in writing, plain as day. He wrote about getting me declared incompetent. He wrote about the memory specialist he'd already lined up to deliver the diagnosis he wanted. He wrote, and I'll never forget the phrase, that the old man will be in a home by spring and won't know the difference. My daughter's husband. About me. In writing. There's more, Vince said, and this is the part that changes everything. There's a wire that went out of an account your daughter is a signer on. Looks like Garrett used her name. If that's true, she might be in trouble too. Or she might be a witness who didn't fully know what she was signing. Either way, this isn't just a family squabble anymore, Russ. This is wire fraud. This is bank fraud. This is the kind of thing the U.S. Attorney's Office in Portland eats for breakfast. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about getting justice. When you finally have your enemy dead to rights, it doesn't feel like triumph. Not at first. It feels like grief. I had proof now that the man my daughter married had been planning to lock me away and steal everything I'd built, and that he'd been willing to use her name to do it, and that some part of her, I still don't know how big a part, had gone along with it. There was no version of Sunday dinner where everybody walked away happy. The plank was rotten clear through. I was going to have to cut. Marty came up from Portland the next week, and we sat at my kitchen table with all of it spread out. The doctor's letter, Vince's photographs, the wire records, printouts of Garrett's own words, and Marty, who had been a lawyer for 40 years and had a poker face like a tombstone, looked at it all and let out a low whistle. "Russ," he said, "you don't need to sign anything to win this. You've already won. The question is how you want to do it. We can hand this to the prosecutors quietly, and you never have to see his face again. Clean. Lawyerly. Safe." "No," I said. Marty raised an eyebrow. I'd been thinking about this for 2 weeks, working it out plank by plank in my head while I sanded that sloop. "He came into my house," I said, "and he made my daughter hit me, and he called me a burden, and he was going to put me in a home and tell people I didn't know my own name. I'm not going to let that happen to me in some lawyer's conference room with a stranger sliding papers across a table. He wanted Sunday dinner. I'm going to give him Sunday dinner. I just get to decide who sits at the table." Marty looked at me for a long moment, and then the old kid who let the air out of the principal's tires came back into his face, and he grinned. "All right," he said, "then let's set a beautiful table." The next thing I did was the riskiest. I called my grandson. His name is Cole. He's 11 years old, and he is the best thing my daughter ever did, and I love that boy down to the soles of my feet. He spends his summers at the yard with me, learning to splice line and bail a skiff, and he is the only person in that whole family who never once made me feel like furniture. I called him on the phone he's not supposed to have at school, and I said, "Cole, it's Grandpa. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if it's scary." And that boy, that 11-year-old boy, said, "I know, Grandpa. I heard them talking. Mom thinks I'm asleep, but I'm not. They're going to send you away," Garrett said. His voice cracked. "I don't want you to go away." I had to grip the edge of the desk. "I'm not going anywhere, sport," I said. "I promise you that. And I need you to do one thing for me on Sunday. Whatever happens at dinner, no matter what gets said, I need you to remember that none of it is your fault and that your grandpa loves you more than the whole bay. Can you do that?" "Yeah," he whispered. "I can do that." "Good man," I said. "Now, go to sleep. I want to tell you about the cooking, because the cooking mattered to me more than I can fully explain. I decided I was going to make Joan's pot roast. Not because it was fancy, it isn't. It's a plain New England Sunday roast, chuck and carrots and onions and potatoes, braised all day until it falls apart. I made it because it was hers, and because it was the meal we ate at that table every Sunday for 43 years, and because if I was going to take a saw to my own family in that room, I wanted my wife in it with me. I got up early Sunday and I browned the meat in the cast iron pan, and the smell filled the whole house, and I swear I could feel her standing at my shoulder telling me I'd burn it if I didn't turn it down. I set the table for 8. 8. Garrett had no idea I'd invited anyone but family. They arrived at 1 o'clock. My daughter looking thin and tired and not quite able to meet my eyes. Garrett in a sport coat carrying a leather folder like a man carrying a winning lottery ticket, and Cole, who ran straight to me and wrapped his arms around my middle and held on, and I held him right back. Garrett was in a fine mood. He complimented the smell of the roast. He complimented the yard, the view, the cove he was about to sell out from under me. He talked about Florida, about how I'd thank him in a year. And I played my part. I nodded. I served. I was the agreeable old fool right up until everyone had a full plate. Then there was a knock at the door. I watched Garrett's face when I went to answer it. I watched the first crack appear, because the man who came in out of the cold was not family. It was Marty Quinn in his expensive tie, carrying a thick accordion folder. And behind Marty came a woman in a gray suit who introduced herself, very pleasantly, as an assistant United States attorney, and a man who showed a badge and said the letters FBI in a calm, flat voice. And behind them, and this is the one that turned Garrett the color of old putty, came Sutton Crane himself, the developer, the man Garrett had been writing all those incriminating letters to. Because Vince had gotten to Crane first, and Crane, faced with the choice of being a co-conspirator or a cooperating witness, had made the only smart decision of the whole sorry business. "Russ," Garrett said, and his voice had gone high and strange. "What is this?" "What is this?" I said, sitting back down at the head of my own table. "Is dinner." "Sit down, son. Your roast is getting cold." My daughter looked from face to face, and I watched the understanding come over her in waves, and I watched her start to shake. Garrett tried to stand up. The FBI agent suggested very politely that he stay seated. "You want to know what I forget, Garrett?" I said. "You want to know about my failing memory? Let me tell you what I remember." And I nodded to Marty, who opened the folder and laid it out, page by page, right there on the Sunday tablecloth. Dr. Patel's letter, the Wire records, the Delaware Shell Company, and then last, Garrett's own letters to Crane, his own words, the plan to lock me away by spring, the line about how I wouldn't know the difference. The AUSA read that line out loud in that pleasant, level voice, and the whole room went silent except for the wood stove ticking. Garrett's mouth opened and closed like a fish on the floorboards. My daughter had begun to cry. Not pretty crying, the real kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere old. "Dad," she said. "Dad, I didn't know about I didn't know it was that far. He told me it was just to protect you, he told me. And I want to be honest with you, because I promised you I would be. There was a part of me, a hard old part, that wanted to let her drown right alongside him. She slapped me. She called me a danger to myself. She read his script, but she was still my captain in the bow of the skiff. and the wire that was in her name. Vince had been right, turned out to be the thing that saved her. Because the proof showed she'd signed where Garrett told her to sign without ever understanding what it was. She was a tool he'd used, the same as he'd tried to use me. The AUSA made that clear, in a way I will always be grateful for. That my daughter was looking like a witness, not a defendant, if she chose to tell the truth. So I did the hardest, best thing I have ever done. I looked at my crying daughter across my wife's pot roast, and I said, "You have a choice to make right now, in this room. You can stand with him, and you can go down where he's going, or you can tell these people the truth, every word of it, and you can be Cole's mother, and you can earn your way back to being my daughter. But you cannot have both. Not anymore. I gave you everything for 40 years, and it taught you I was a thing you could use. Today I'm teaching you the other lesson. Today the answer is no, and you have to choose." She chose the truth. She told them everything. It took a long time. They took a long time. They took Garrett out in handcuffs as the light was going low over the cove. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anybody. The Marina Hotel deal died on the spot. The cove is still mine. The boatworks is still mine. And the friendship sloop went back in the water that June, and she's the prettiest thing on the bay. My daughter and I are not whole. I want to be straight with you about that, because anybody who tells you these things wrap up clean is selling you something. There's a crack between us that may never fully close. But she testified. She's in counseling away from him, learning who she is without a man's hand on her shoulder telling her what to think. And she lets me have Cole on the weekends now. No fuss, no folders. We're scarfing in new wood. It's slow. You can't rush it. That evening, after they'd all gone, after the house was finally quiet, Cole helped me clear the table. He's a good worker, that boy. When the dishes were done, I took down the shoebox of letters, the ones I write to his grandmother, and I sat him beside me at the desk, and I wrote a new one. I let him watch. And then I gave him a fresh sheet of paper and a pen, and I told him to write one too, to his grandmother, or to himself in 20 years, or to nobody. It doesn't matter who. What matters is that you learn to say the true thing in your own hand. I told him that a man who can write down exactly what he means is a man nobody can ever fully fool. He wrote for a long time, his tongue poking out the corner of his mouth the way it does, and when he was done, he folded it and put it in the box with mine, and I didn't ask to read it. Some letters aren't for reading. Some are just for keeping. I poured myself a glass of Jones rye, and I stood at the window looking out at the dark water and the snow coming down soft on the cove. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a burden or a relic or a thing to be managed. I felt like what I am, a man who built something true and refused to let a thief tear it down. Here's what 40 years of taking saws to rotten wood finally taught me. And I'm 68, so I figure I've earned the right to say it plain. Love without a backbone isn't love. It's just slow rot, and it'll bring the whole house down if you let it. I thought giving my daughter everything and asking nothing in return was the same as loving her. It wasn't. It taught her I had no value beyond what she could take. Real love sometimes has to be the hardest word in the language, which is no. And a man who can't say it to his own family isn't protecting them, he's drowning them. Your blood does not get to slap you and call it family. Respect is the only thing that ever made anybody kin. And if you've got a rotten plank in your life right now, you already know exactly where it is. You've known for a long time. The only question left is whether you got the nerve to pick up the saw. If any part of this old man's story landed somewhere true for you tonight, do me the kindness of hitting that like button and sharing it with somebody who needs to hear it. I read every comment, so tell me, have you ever had to cut a toxic person out of your own family to save yourself? And would you do it again? And subscribe, So the next time I sit down to write one of these letters out loud, you'll be at the table with me. Thank you for keeping an old man company. Good night from the Cove. For a long time, I told myself that loving my daughter meant never telling her no. I paid for everything. I asked for nothing. And I called that being a good father. But standing in my kitchen with my cheek still burning from her hand, I finally understood the truth I'd been hiding from for 40 years. Every time I gave without asking for respect in return, I was teaching her that I had no worth beyond what she could take. Garrett didn't create that. He just found the soft, rotten wood I'd left in my own family and drove a wedge into it. That's the first law I learned the hard way. Nothing happens out of nowhere. The slap that night was the harvest of seeds I'd planted by being generous and spineless at the same time. What saved me wasn't anger. Anger would have had me throwing them out the door that first night, and I'd have lost everything within the month, signed away by a court that never met me. What saved me was sitting down with a pen instead, thinking 3 moves ahead, calling Marty and Dr. Patel and Vince, before I ever raised my voice. There's a quiet kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with school and everything to do with patience, the willingness to study a problem the way you'd study rot in a hull before you ever pick up the saw. I let them believe I was beaten so I could see the whole of what they were doing. That patience is what put Garrett in handcuffs and left the Cove in my hands. But knowing the right thing and finding the spine to do it are 2 different mountains. The hardest moment of my whole life wasn't gathering the proof. It was looking across my wife's pot roast at my crying daughter and telling her she had to choose, knowing I might lose her forever either way. It took everything I had left to say no to my own child, to hold the line when every soft part of me wanted to fold the way I always had. That strength didn't come from rage. It came from finally deciding that my dignity was worth more than her comfort. So if there's something I'd hand to my grandson Cole, and to you it's this: be the kind of person who does right even when it costs you, because a man without a backbone teaches the people around him that he can be used. Learn to see clearly and plan quietly because clever beats loud almost every time. And when the moment comes that you already know what's right, find the nerve to act, even with your hands shaking. I'm 68 years old, alone in a big house on a cold bay, and I have never once felt stronger. The plank was rotten. I cut it out. And what's left is sound.